My name is David Hunter. I'm 51 years old, and for 30 of those years, I served in the United States Army. I didn't carry a rifle into battle or lead combat squads into danger. I worked in logistics, quietly behind the scenes, making sure fuel, food, and every last bolt and wire got where it needed to go. I rose through the ranks, started as a green lieutenant with more questions than answers, and retired as a colonel with 6 command-level deployments under my belt. My specialty was strategic logistics infrastructure, not the flashy stuff. The long-haul planning, the multi-country coordination, the frameworks that keep entire operations from falling apart. I never asked for medals. I never cared about promotions. What mattered to me was that when a unit touched down in the middle of nowhere, they didn't have to wonder if someone had their back. Because they did. I was that someone. I made the invisible work. And yet, after decades of holding the line and making sure no one ever had to think about supply failures, I was let go. Not even fired properly, just pushed aside. They called it streamlining, reorg, budget optimization, but I knew what it was. Someone upstairs thought the guy who kept the engine running was no longer useful. That's why this story still burns. Because it's not just about me. It's about what happens when people forget who built the machine they now take for granted. It was a Thursday morning, gray light coming in through the blinds, and I was already halfway through my second cup of black coffee. The invite just said Strategic Realignment Review, but the attendee list told me more than the title ever could. 4 generals, 2 civilian leads from the Pentagon, and my division chief sitting dead center like a statue. As soon as the camera clicked on, I knew something was off. No greetings, no check-ins, just tight faces and shallow nods. Everyone looked like they were bracing for turbulence, but pretending they were strapped in tight. Major General Clark spoke first. His voice was calm, slow. He thanked everyone for their service and then shifted tone like someone flipping a switch. He said logistics operations had shown signs of inefficiency and central dependency on legacy frameworks. That's when my stomach turned. Those weren't just buzzwords, that was code. It meant they were blaming me. Blaming the very system I'd spent decades building. They didn't say my name, but they didn't have to. Every eye flicked toward the lower corner of the screen where my name Saturday. I felt it before I saw it. I didn't react. Didn't speak. I leaned back slightly, muted my mic, and stared straight ahead. Part of me hoped it was a misunderstanding, a misread report, something that could be cleared up with context. But I knew better. Then came the line I'll never forget. My division chief, Colonel Abbott, said the phrase like it had no weight. Some roles may no longer align with evolving operational priorities. That was it. Just a clean slice through 30 years of service. I looked at his face, searching for some hesitation. Some flicker of doubt. There was none. Only silence followed, then the meeting moved on like nothing had happened. Inside, I felt something unravel. Not rage, not yet. Just that hollow ache you get when the people you carried through every storm suddenly act like you're the dead weight. I kept my face steady, hands still, but my heart was pounding so loud I could feel it in my throat. That was the moment I realized something deeper than demotion was happening. I wasn't just being let go, I was being erased. And that kind of betrayal doesn't make you angry right away. It makes you quiet, focused, cold. Most people in command only saw logistics as boxes and numbers. Supplies moved in, equipment moved out, fuel calculated, missions supported. But to me, it was never that simple. It was a living organism, and every shipment, every signature, every delayed part had consequences that echoed through the entire chain. I spent over a decade designing a logistics infrastructure that could adapt and respond under pressure. Not just move things faster, but protect the entire operation from failure. I layered it with checks, redundancies, and manual control points that only a few ever knew existed. Not because I was paranoid, but because I understood people forget who keeps the engine running until the engine stops. Somewhere deep in that system was something I called Clause 14.3. Buried in a network of cross-departmental control policies, signed off years ago when we were still stabilizing missions across 3 continents. The clause stated that if certain conditions were met, conditions tied to systemic leadership failure and strategic neglect, then specific authorities would revert to the original system's architect. That architect was me. Clause 14.3 wasn't about revenge, it was insurance. A safeguard built for days when political shifts and budget cuts might turn competence into a liability. It triggered a slow reversion protocol. Nothing flashy, no alarms. Just a realignment of control away from those who played politics and back to the one person who built the machine in the first place. I never mentioned it to anyone outside a select group, not because it was secret, but because no one ever asked how the system stayed standing. They assumed it just worked, that cargo flew itself in, that fleets coordinated without friction. But I knew better. Every seamless mission rested on layers of logic I wrote myself. Logic built to hold and break only if someone forced my hand. That day, on that Zoom call, as they stripped me of everything, they unknowingly met the trigger conditions. Clause 14.3 began to shift. Silently, line by line. Access credentials, control pathways, override permissions. It started moving back to me. I wasn't just a cog in their machine, I was the one who wrote the manual. And now, I was the only one who could stop what was coming. The official notice came in at 8:42 a.m., just a sterile email from Human Resources flagged as a general update. Retirement benefits temporarily suspended pending review. No explanation, no conversation. Just a line in a mass message like I was background noise. I stared at it for a while, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. That was the final cut. Quiet, surgical, and meant to disappear me without making a scene. But what they didn't know, what they never cared enough to learn, was that they had just tripped the wrong wire. That afternoon, I opened an encrypted folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a simple interface, stripped down and built for resilience. One field, one task. A logistics renewal authorization for a multi-branch supply corridor connecting 3 strategic hubs. It needed a live signature every 90 days to stay valid. No auto-approve, no digital proxy, no delegation. That was the design. I made sure of it. I called it Integrity Lock, and I pitched it back then as a safeguard against automation errors. Truth was, I wanted full control because I saw what happened when systems ran without accountability. I looked at the blank signature field and didn't move. Just let the cursor blink. The moment I failed to sign, clause 14.3 would begin its sequence. Not an explosion, just a shift. The system would detect an unrenewed contract, flag it as inactive, and begin freezing downstream operations within 72 hours. Every department would think it was an oversight. Maybe someone missed a deadline, but the architecture was already wired to route control to me once that first signal hit. They didn't know that the man they cut loose was the one still holding the master key. I closed the window, marked the contract as pending, walked outside without a word. They thought I was just a paper pusher, a guy who shuffled spreadsheets while they made the real decisions. But I wasn't shuffling papers. I was building a kill switch. And now, with a single unsigned form, I had flipped it, quietly, precisely, and with the calm of someone who had prepared for this moment all along. By day 2, the warning signs were small. A shipment of replacement rotors didn't arrive at Fort Levin. One convoy rerouted due to fuel misallocation. On the surface, nothing too unusual. These things happen. People assumed it was just a clerical lag or some low-level scheduling error. But by day 3, the emails started flooding in. Maintenance reports flagged parts shortages across 3 bases. Flight crews grounded aircraft. Fuel reserves dropped below contingency thresholds without any explanation. Communications were still calm, but under the surface, panic was building. Units were checking and rechecking spreadsheets, not realizing the data itself had gone stale. By day 4, it was impossible to ignore. An entire engineering battalion in Nevada halted mid-project due to missing voltage regulators. The overseas depot in Okinawa sent an emergency alert. Their logistics sync had failed entirely. Command scrambled for answers, demanding status updates, workarounds, manual reroutes. But every request hit the same dead end. The systems weren't down, they were just empty, silent, waiting for something that no one could trace. Clause 14.3 had moved to Phase 2. With no live renewal in place, every supply channel tied to the suspended contract began freezing in sequence. It didn't crash the network. It just stopped responding. Procurement hubs lost their automation. Backup orders required manual override, and the permissions had already rerouted. All paths led back to me, but they didn't know that yet. They thought it was a systems bug. Maybe a database sync issue. Maybe sabotage. But no one imagined it was by design. That the very architecture they had ignored had turned into a maze without an exit. Meetings doubled, then tripled. Ops tried to push through emergency overrides, but the system flagged each as unauthorized. A lieutenant colonel tried to brute force an access script and triggered a 3-hour lockdown across the eastern sector. Somewhere in an operations center, someone must have finally asked the real question: who originally built this process? But by then, it was too late. The system was already folding in on itself. Every patch attempt just fed the problem. No fuel moved, no tech deployed, no parts cleared. They had no idea that the whole infrastructure was humming on rules I had written. Rules they never reviewed. Rules they thought didn't matter until everything stopped working. And the silence got louder. You don't notice the gears when they're turning smooth. You only hear them when they grind to a halt. And by then, it's too late. The first call came at 7:14 a.m. I saw the number. I knew the extension. I let it ring. No voicemail, no second attempt for a while. Then the emails started coming in. Operations flagged me for emergency consultation. Logistics asked for credential restoration. IT requested sign-off on backdoor protocols. I didn't open a single one. By noon, the calls came faster, one after another. Different names, different ranks. Some from people I hadn't spoken to in years. A few used personal numbers. One even texted. I read none of it. Just watched the names roll by like faces in a rearview mirror. They tried assigning my access chain to someone else. System rejected it. They escalated to command-level override. The core flagged a protocol violation and locked them out. They spun up a new authorization tier. The signature misfired. You can't fake what was never yours to begin with. And every attempt triggered silent audit logs. Each failure added another time-stamped record. They didn't realize it yet, but they were digging deeper into a minefield I had buried years ago. One call even came from the base commander. It rang 8 times before silence. They kept pushing, tried cloning old login shells, reconstructing credential paths, isolating biometric backups. Everything came up empty. Not because I blocked them, but because I built the rules they were now trapped inside. I didn't need to lift a finger. The system was already doing what I designed it to do. Then, late that night, my phone buzzed once. A message from Lauren, my former assistant. She'd left a year ago, moved out west, quiet job, new life. Her message was short. Just a screenshot of a Slack thread. One line highlighted. They're panicking. No one knows how deep his access goes. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I turned my phone face down and said nothing. It hit me in the middle of the night. One line, buried in the logistics control charter. Clause 14.3. I'd written it myself, almost as a joke at the time. A single sentence that had made it through 5 revisions, 3 commanders, and 2 system migrations. It read like legal filler. Passive voice, technical language, dull phrasing. But it wasn't a joke. Not to me. Clause 14. 3. Authorized a full operational hold on strategic logistics should the architect of the framework be involuntarily removed without cause. It was never flagged, never questioned. Because no one thought a clause like that would ever matter. Until now. Until the system began locking itself down and someone somewhere finally pulled out the old manuals. I found the original copy in a fireproof drawer in my apartment, printed on thin, government stock paper, yellowing at the corners. Line 14, 3 was still there. Faint, but clear enough. It wasn't bolded, wasn't underlined. Just a line like any other, halfway down the page. But that line was the key. The one thing no algorithm, no committee, no chain of command could overwrite, and they had triggered it with their own decision. I didn't shout, I didn't post, I didn't warn. I just folded the page once, slid it into a manila envelope, and wrote one name on the front. General Morrison, the man who'd signed my separation papers. Then I called a courier. No signature required. Just a quiet handoff at the front gate of the Joint Command Center. Inside the envelope, I didn't add any notes. No letter, no explanation, just the document. I knew the moment he saw it, he'd remember, maybe not the words, but the moment we wrote it. Late night, war games on screen, budget cuts looming. I told him then, every system needs a final lever, one that answers to no one but the man who built it. He laughed, signed the page, and never looked at it again. But I had. I'd watched them forget. Watched them build castles on sand, assuming the foundation would always hold. That the quiet guy in the back would always say yes. That systems didn't remember. But they do, because I built this one with memory, with intent, and loyalty. When betrayed doesn't scream, it withdraws. I tracked the delivery confirmation an hour later, marked as received, signed by Aide. No calls came, no emails. I imagined the moment he opened it, his eyes moving to that line, the pause, the realization, that chill running down his spine, not because of fear, but because he knew they'd missed something vital, something final. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't personal, it was protocol. You don't rip the engine out of a plane mid-flight and expect it to glide. You don't cut loose the man who wired your heartbeat and expect rhythm to keep. I didn't do this to punish them. I did it to remind them that some lines are written in ink, others in consequence. By the time the envelope landed on his desk, the system had already begun to purge inactive command lines. Not with fire, with silence. Terminals blinked to black. Logistics chains stalled mid-route. Requisitions looped. Audits tripped. The machine wasn't crashing. It was disengaging, one gear at a time. And all because of one line. One they forgot, but I never did. Within 24 hours, the first contractors froze their deliveries. Not out of protest, but compliance. The system had flagged all active logistics streams as compromised. No verified oversight. No valid command. So everything paused. Warehouses locked themselves down. Autonomous inventory systems entered verification mode. No items in, no items out. Across the globe, pallets sat idle on hot tarmacs and cold concrete. Crates stacked, untouched, as if the war had stopped mid-scene. Fuel transfers delayed, food shipments rerouted, maintenance kits for entire air squadrons marked pending review. Not failed, not canceled, just frozen. Like time itself had hit pause on the entire support backbone of the armed forces. Internally, they tried to contain it. Media blackout, no leaks. The press didn't hear a whisper. But inside the walls, panic set in. Meetings stretched through the night. Generals barked orders that vanished into silence. No system recognized new signatures. No chain of command passed the validation tests. Clause 14.3 wasn't just a dead switch, it was a gate. One that could only be reopened by the person they'd shut out. And now, they couldn't even say my name out loud. Not in those rooms, not on record. They brought in cybersecurity, legal teams, contractors. Nothing moved. Because this wasn't a glitch. This was design. Quiet, deliberate, surgical, and it all worked exactly as intended. Because they never deleted the root protocol. They thought erasing the person erased the authority. But the system remembered. One by one, bases reported delays. Then shortages. No one yelled. No one protested. Because it couldn't look like collapse. Everything had to look like standard review, even if no one could touch a single file without tripping an alert, even if every workaround just made the lock tighter. At some point, someone must have opened the personnel files, dug through the exit documents, found clause 12.7, the one about special systems retention, a clause they wrote, a payout condition valid only in cases where critical systems halted due to unauthorized command override. That morning, my phone buzzed once. A payment alert. 7 figures. No explanation, no message, just funds. Transferred from Defense Logistics Reserve. Authorized automatically through the clause they forgot to nullify. The irony stung, but I smiled anyway. They froze my pension, shut my access, painted me invisible. But they left the trigger active, and the system paid me for the failure they caused. Not as revenge, not as reward, just as protocol. And in the silence that followed, the only sound left was the system echoing back one truth. You don't cut the man who built the spine and expect the body to stand.